critical analysis. That's quite important here because what is critical analysis? It's highly sophisticated, in-depth analysis of the text. Now remember, we are deconstructing the text for what it is now. So um we're using highly sophisticated, in-depth analysis. There is a personal interpretation of the meaning. For instance, big ideas in the text, like um again, for instance, I'm gonna use Jane Austen, right? So big ideas about the role of marriage as a social opportunity for women in the 1800s. So I may, that's that big idea there, but then I may have my own personal interpretation on it, and talk about that personal interpretation. I may have my own specific perspective on it, and that's my personal interpretation. I did see a question come through which asked, was right here, and it was a good one. So I'm gonna answer that now. Can you use first person when voicing your personal interpretation? It's a bit of a grey area because some schools and teachers say that's okay, you can. Some say don't. I personally wouldn't. Like whenever you're talking about your own ideas, you want to say readers are allowed to readers are allowed to believe this, or readers believe this, where I am the reader, or audiences do this. So I always like to position myself as the audience, and that's how I express my personal interpretation. So again, there's nothing like, it's a bit of a gray area, especially with advanced and extension students, but you can, like, I know some schools are fine with it, but I personally would I would personally say refrain from it if you can, and stick to like audiences and readers, because you never know, like some markers may not want it, like you don't want to sort of you, you don't want that to be like a like a downfall kind of thing in your essay. So yeah, so refrain from it if you can, and that's my personal advice here. Okay, cool. So, and that's why I said, like, your school probably told you that's fine. It's your personal choice, but I personally like to not use it. So, critical analysis, we talk about the impact on audience and the judgment on effectiveness. How effective is the text? So, highly sophisticated analysis, how do we do that? We want to start off by identifying multiple techniques. We want to identify more difficult techniques too, because now we're looking at more sophisticated analysis, and now you want to go one step further and talk about the more obscure and sophisticated techniques. We want to analyze the use of form. How is form being used? Remember, think about both macro and micro form, and identifying self-reflexivity. So again, we're looking at that metatextuality in text. Is the text commenting on the role of language? Is the text breaking the fourth wall to talk specifically to the reader? So I've got an example. Okay, so now firstly, identifying multiple techniques. So let's go through each one of these. This is from Great Expectations. As I passed the church, I felt a sublime compassion for the poor creatures where we were destined to go there, Sunday after Sunday, all their lives through, and to lie obscurely at last among the low green mounds. So there's the repetition of Sunday, which creates a sense of monotony and futility of lower class routines. There are euphemisms, condescending tone, and also ironically juxtaposed with a symbol of virtue in the church. We're destined to go there, it's sublime compassion, but then obscurely you lay at the end among the low green mountains. So there's that irony there. Oh my goodness, ironic juxtaposition. Okay, next we look at identifying more difficult techniques. So this is from T.S. Eliot's. Uh, this is from T.S. Eliot. It's the third poem that you would look at, whose name I've just seemed to have forgotten, quite interestingly, but let's start. But we've got the epigraph, so the epigraphic allusion to Dante's Inferno, which equates modern life to purgatory. So that is an epigraphic allusion. Then we've got the juxtaposition of romanticist imagery with modernist. So let us go, then you and I, when the evening, no, this is the first one. When the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. So this is the journey of no, this is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. That's what it is. And then we've got a synecdoche, and I have known the arms, known them already. Arms that are bracketed in white and bare. So synecdoche is when different body parts are shown as disconnected. So it talks about like arms, and so like it basically fragments the body parts. That's synecdoche here. Okay, so here are some other techniques that you can look at as well, like assonance, metonymy, oxymoron, enjambment, ironing. So you want to be able to use and identify more difficult techniques, and the texts that we're looking at are like the canonical sophisticated texts. You'll find them in there too. Okay, now highly sophisticated analysis, analyzing the use of form. Form plays a very significant role here in our analysis. So in Goodnight and Good Luck, the use of digestus plus black and white, that's a use of form, and the impact here is that the audience is immersed in real historical period. In Unfolding Florence, the bricolage, college interview, animation footage, the complexity of a person's life cannot be condensed into a single narrative. So that's an effect of the use of these different features. Finally, identifying self-reflexivity, aka getting meta. So how does the author reflect on the nature of language? So, how do we get meta here? So we can talk about subverting traditions and conventions when texts are using when texts are when texts are using, when texts are subverting different traditions and conventions, like with T.S. Eliot, you look at his use of fragmentation, non-linearity, and like a and a fragmented structure. So those are, it's subverting those conventional techniques from Romanticism, because he's a modernist writer, and before him it was and at the same time there's aspects of Romanticist writing going on, which is more it's linear, more flowery language. Not the best way to describe it, but you'll know what I mean when I say that. And now he subverts traditions in his writing. Then we've got breaking the fourth wall. So breaking the fourth wall is when the author is or the composer is speaking directly to the audience. I did see a question come up about the lecture, whether it will be recorded or not. It is recorded, so you will be able to access it once we're done. So identifying self-reflexivity. So we've got breaking the fourth wall, authorial intrusion. So authorial intrusion is when the author is intruding, like they're speaking. A really big example of this that I can immediately think of from the top of my head, if you have watched or read a series of unfortunate events, Lemony Snicket is a classic example of authorial intrusion. There are a lot more other examples. You do see sort of in Bridgerton too, like where this author, so you can also see it there. So finally, self-referential, so discusses language and writing. And that's about discussing the role of language. Awesome. So personal interpretation and judgment on effectiveness. So it's about the unity of language concepts and forms. So your personal interpretation is here. Okay, so now remember, your personal interpretation is here, where all these three ideas come together. Now remember, we want to talk about how, for instance, the text may navigate through binaries, or it contends with human fallibility, proves universal truths for their value, or encapsulates a different time period, and reveals how experience is constructed by power. Okay, now audience impact. What is audience impact? So with audience impact, we want to look both at contextual and contemporary responders. So we want to look at both the influence of context on the composition of the text, and also the reception of the text in different time periods. That's contextual, and how the text can argue against contextual values. So when I talk about T.S. Eliot, he's arguing against some of those underlying romanticist values, through his modernist writing. Contemporary responders, how is the message enduring? We are the contemporary responders. How is the message enduring? So is the message is the text questioning our values? Is it critiquing outmoded literary conventions? And is it reflecting on our identity as a society? So a sample analysis here is the disorientation of individual in the burgeoning 20th century mass culture is embodied in the self-effacing narrator of Rhapsody on a Windy Night, whose lack of agency is parodied by the personification of the lamps. Mount, the bed is open, the toothbrush hangs on the wall, put your shoes at the door, sleep, prepare for life. So symbolic of the rapid industrialization and machination of life, the lamps commanding tone and truncated lines bitterly satirizes human subjugation to routines and machineries. Such a concern resonates equally with contemporary anguish over individual agency. So we are looking at here with the analysis. You can see how each technique is how the technique is backed by the effect. Okay, so integrating scholars. So remember, scholars are used to enhance your argument. It doesn't have to be like a long, tiresome process, but they're used to enhance your argument, and they articulate on a concept that goes beyond, your general Year 12 understanding. And I don't mean that in a in a condescending way, but it does encapsulate different ideas and theories that we don't come across in Year 12. They point out more complex combination of techniques in the text too, which you can always use in your own analysis, and they back up any of your points, that may look like they're out of reach. So if you've got a unique point that you want to talk about, you find a scholar to back yourself, that is going to be a solid piece of analysis. If you've got any questions about critics, how many you should use or whatever, just pop them up and we can go through that as well. But using 1 or 2 quotes for your essay from a critic is fine. 1 is enough. You can use 2 if it's like super helpful. You want to use, like, you don't. Okay, now you can always go against a critic too, but only do that if you've got evidence to back yourself. Finally, who is a critic? So you can utilize a range of different resources. Everyone who comments on the text and criticize, well, not criticize specifically, but has an opinion on it, that's a critic. But in your writing, in your essays, you want to use reputed critics. So you want to focus on critics like, you can, from research papers, even like, what do you call it? Reputed sites like the New Yorker, or like or university websites. They work fine. You don't want to rely on like YouTube reactions for your critics. So kind of be mindful about that. Wouldn't it be better to just make the critics' idea seem like your own? That's a good question. It would be plagiarism if you do that. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It would make you seem more sophisticated, but the marker will probably be able to tell. You can obviously reword it and stuff, but it's good to use a critic to back your point and to say, okay, I've done my research. The critic is backing my point up too. So you can use the idea, and you then use the critic. You obviously want to credit the critic. You don't want to plagiarize in this case. All right, cool. Now, moving on, how to integrate scholars. Do skim read for concepts. Don't get bogged down, in loads and loads of journals. Like, you don't have to do that. You've got a year, like, if you're pursuing tertiary education, you'll get a chance to do that. So take the easy route for now. Summarize critical readings into a few key points. You don't have to like read the whole thing. You can always just take what you need and get out. Like, that is what you want to do. You don't want to summarize readings in a document as long as the reading itself. Don't do that. Pull out succinct quotes. Don't pull out quotes longer than a sentence. Remember, the essay is about your personal interpretation. It should not be about the critics, what the critic is thinking. So you don't want to over rely on critics, because that's going to tell your marker that the critic is doing the thinking here for you. So you don't want that. Paraphrase critics in your essay to support your point. You don't want to use critics' arguments in your place. That's over reliance on the critic. That's not a very good way to go about it, because that's telling me that there's, to cover up for your lack of personal interpretation, you're using the critic.